Hey, everybody, and welcome to A Real Point of View. My name is Greg Morgan. I'm your host. And joining me tonight is my co-host and one of the many co-hosts that we have on our show, but one of our revered co-hosts, and that is Miss Karen D, the movie maven. How you doing, Karen?
Hello. Doing good, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing good, doing good. And as the host of the show, I'm also the movie guy, the real movie guy on Twitter and on Facebook. So tonight's show, ladies and gentlemen, is about an anniversary. The anniversary of a year, a very important year in film, especially for those of us who are baby boomers, we'll say. What we're celebrating is 50 years of film from the 19. Well, why don't you tell it, Karen? You could probably say it better than I am.
Well, we're celebrating a seminal year in filmmaking, 1967. Amazingly enough, that was 50 years ago. And what a year that was for those of us who are called baby boomers. We may have some memories of 1967. And I guess when I was doing research for this broadcast, I mean, one can't help but think about the chaotic nature that the world seems to have today. And it seems especially unique, and that back in earlier times, we were dealing with much calmer, um, events in terms of current events. I would say that that's not really true. I don't know of a specifically peaceful time since the 1960s. And 1967 was a very chaotic year. Now, there wasn't the chaos that might come from uncertainty about the goals or the intentions of a president, but there was a great deal of uncertainty in the United States. And for instance, for example, we were in the middle of a major war.
Mm-hmm.
It was an undeclared war, so that caused a great deal of controversy. But the Vietnam War was really at its height in 1967. And to accompany that war were an incredible number of protests by college students and by others who did not like the fact that we were in this undeclared war, didn't understand or agree with the goals of the war. However, they were stated, the official goal was to fight the spread of communism. But there was a great deal of consternation about the war, about this undeclared war. And a highlight of that was that Muhammad Ali was stripped of his title in 1967 for refusing to take part in the military and refusing to serve in the military and refusing to be part of the draft. That decision, in my opinion, is one of the most courageous decisions by a prominent person that ever unfolded in front of the world on television and in newspapers, because that decision changed the course of his life. He had not only already won gold medals by the Olympic gold medal for boxing by this point, but he was on track to being the singular most incredible champion in boxing history. And when he decided to not serve in the war, that and knowing that he would be arrested and prosecuted and probably jailed, that happened at a time when he was at his absolute prime as a boxer. So that was a life-changing decision. The other things that happened were the 6-day war between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, and Spain. It actually lasted 6 days. The first Super Bowl happened in 1967 between what teams, Greg? You guess.
I don't know.
Green Bay and Kansas City.
Oh, and now that you said it, I don't care.
um, the Beatles were huge in 1967,
Yeah,
and
I've seen a lot of beetles, and they're like really huge. Like in Mexico, these kids have beetles as pets, and they can
the
actually
musical
ride up
group.
on
The
them.
musical group, not the
Oh,
insects.
okay. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Karen had all these facts. I had a good fact, and it's didn't play well.
Useless. But yeah, get out of here. Um, no, the Beatles came out with the Magical Mystery Tour, Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane, still one of my all-time favorite songs.
Is in my ears and in my eyes.
Right. The Doors did Light My
Oh,
Fire in 1967.
love the Doors.
The Corporation for Public Broadcasting was created that year. The Black Panthers marched on the capital of California, Sacramento. Ronald Reagan was governor of California at the time. And guess what they marched about? They guessed about the right to carry concealed weapons in the state of California because California had very strong anti-gun laws. And they
Wow.
marched against that. They wanted the right to carry arms and carry arms in public. Thurgood Marshall was appointed to the Supreme Court as the first African-American Supreme Court justice. Loving versus Virginia was handed down by the Supreme Court that very same year, and it invalidated all the state laws against interracial marriage. Otis Redding sadly was killed in a plane crash that year. And astronauts Grissom, White, and Chaffee were killed in the Apollo 1 explosion. There were race riots.
Before you go on, can I go back to Otis Redding for just a moment?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very brief moment. Some colleagues of mine, we were discussing tragedies in for as far as entertainers being killed. I don't know if you were aware of this, but part of the Bar-Kays singing group, the Bar-Kays actually were hired to actually back Otis Redding, and only half of them made the trip. And they were killed with Otis Redding as well. The other half of the Bar-Kays are what we more or less knew about the Bar-Kays later on in like the 70s. Whereas only half that group was from the original group. The other half passed away with Otis Redding.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting. There were race riots all over America: Cleveland, Detroit, Tampa, Buffalo, Newark, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Washington, D.C. Summer of 67. Also the Summer of Love. There was a be-in San Francisco. There were love-ins all over the country. And I also will end this romp down memory lane with the note that in 1967, McDonald's introduced the Big Mac hamburger sandwich.
Wow. You know, 1967 was a blur because I was a young child at the time. But ironically, the films that we're going to hopefully touch on, some of those films tonight, have always been a mainstay in the films that I watch over time, that I've watched multiple times as well. So I was quite surprised that so many of them were from the 1967. And although we'll probably, spend a little bit of time on the films that we were looking to discuss tonight, still, I want to have an opportunity, latter part of our show, to just go over some of the really good films from that year. Without further ado, why don't we go ahead and get started into some of the movies that we thought were pretty good from 1967 and made an impression somehow on us, that we're even mentioning them today. So did you want to get started with that, Karen, and I'll follow suit?
Okay. Well, the three films that I would really like to highlight are Valley of the Dolls, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and In the Heat of the Night. So let me start out with Valley of the Dolls. It was directed by Mark Robson, and it was produced by Mark Robson and David Weisbart. And I wanted to bring this film up because this film in 1967 was interesting in that it had a largely female cast. And that was kind of a rarity for the time, and frankly, is still a rarity today, too much so, in my opinion. This movie is based on the best-selling, and by best-selling, I mean tens of millions, book Valley of the Dolls, written by Jacqueline Susann. Jacqueline Susann also wrote the screenplay along with Helen Deutsch. And this movie is about three women, aspiring actresses, who run up against various obstacles and various sorts of ethical conflicts and things like that as they try to make it as actresses in either New York or LA or wherever. They just want to make it to the big time. And in 1967, the juxtaposition was, do you settle, quote unquote, settle down, get married, have babies, raise a family, or are you just going to give all that up, all of that loveliness, the incredible luck of being able to wash your husband's laundry, cook your husband's dinner, massage his putrid feet or whatever, or give all that up for the not great chance of actually making it as a star, but still ending up being alone, embittered, an old maid because you didn't catch your man when you could when you were young. That was in my opinion, that's sort of the way the choices were characterized in 1967. Still, it was interesting and, like I said, unusual to have a largely female cast with men playing the supporting roles. This movie was all about the women. The movie starred Patty Duke, the late Patty Duke Aston. It starred the late Sharon Tate. She was killed shortly after this movie was released by Charles Manson and his horrible gang. Barbara Parkins was also in this movie. And what's interesting is Patty Duke Aston was probably really the star. It was really an ensemble piece, but if anyone was the star, it was Patty Duke Aston. She had sort of the juiciest role. She played Neely, who was what's in the industry called a triple threat. She could sing, she could dance, she could act. And she was discovered because she was badly treated as she was auditioning for a role. And then she gets another role as a result because the director took pity on her, and she maximizes her chances and becomes this huge star. But she starts relying on what are called dolls or pills because she has this incredibly grueling schedule. She can't afford to miss any potential opportunity. And so she pushes herself to the limit, and she keeps going with uppers and downers. The Patty Duke Aston character Neely is loosely based on Judy Garland. It's widely regarded as she's based on Judy Garland. Judy Garland was actually supposed to be in this movie. She was supposed to play Helen Lawson, which was the role that was played by Susan Hayward. Guess why Judy Garland didn't play Helen Lawson?
She was in rehab?
Well, close. Judy Garland was fired from the movie for being drunk on set. And she was widely regarded as just being terrible and being insecure. And if you watch the movie, you'll see there's this running storyline where Helen Lawson is threatened, once beguiled and threatened by the new Neely O'Hara character, because Helen Lawson sees in Neely O'Hara the person that she used to be and is captivated by her because she reminds her of herself, but also sees the threat because Helen Lawson's desperately trying to hang on to a movie career when she's probably at the ripe old age of 45 and is already being considered completely aged out of any sort of desirable role. So she's playing an old person who's like on the comeback trail, and here comes Neely O'Hara, who literally just steals the thunder right out from under her because she's brilliant and everybody thinks she's brilliant. And she's nice at first, but then throughout the story, Neely O'Hara starts turning more and more until the pill-popping, shrewish, threatened, insecure person that Helen Lawson was at one time. And they have a great deal of tension between themselves. Then you've got Barbara Parkins, who wants to be an actress, but she is sort of biding her time in the publishing arena as a secretary. And she meets a Hollywood director and goes off with him. And the question is, what happens between them? Do they have premarital sex or not? And what happens if after she becomes tainted with that because she's not a nice girl anymore, and does she take pills or not? Then you have Sharon Tate, who is this blonde bombshell. The character is loosely based on Marilyn Monroe, very loosely based on Marilyn Monroe. But one of the scuttlebutt tales in the movie industry, was that Marilyn Monroe had major issues because she had numerous abortions, like 12. Now that has never been proven, but a storyline in Valley of the Dolls is that Sharon Tate has an abortion at the behest of her mother because her mother is afraid that her getting pregnant will ruin her figure and she'll never be able to make it as a star. She also doesn't want her to get married. She does not want the Sharon Tate character to get married. And of course, the Sharon Tate meets a wonderful man and falls in love. He's a singer. She wants to be an actress. It looks like they're going to romp off and be happy together forever after. But then he starts having balancing issues. And as it turns out, he has a terminal illness. The other thing that happens to this poor tragic character is that Sharon Tate's character has terminal breast cancer. So she's battling terminal breast cancer at the same time that her husband is battling his terminal disease. That storyline was loosely based on Jacqueline Susann, who was battling breast cancer at the time that the movie was being filmed. She briefly won her battle, but about 10 years later, she ended up succumbing to cancer. So that's what's going on in Valley of the Dolls. Now, this movie was panned by a lot of critics. Jacqueline Susann hated the movie. A number of people who were asked to audition or be in the movie hated the script and said, hell no. Helen Mirren auditioned for this movie. Bette Davis was asked to be in this movie.
Wow.
There are so many people who were asked to be in this movie, and Judy Garland wanted to be in the movie. Famously, she took there's a sequin pantsuit that she was supposed to wear as Helen Lawson. When she got fired from the movie, she took that pantsuit with her. And now some people say it was a gift. Others say she just took it because she was PO'd that she got fired from the movie. She's like, well, I'm going to do this or I'm suing you, so I'm taking the suit. And Helen Lawson, Susan Hayward, who was bigger than Judy Garland. Judy Garland was extremely small. I mean, just painfully thin. Susan Hayward was much more healthy. But the clothes needed to be bigger. So a lot of things had to be reworked to fit her. Anyway, people hated the script. They hated the script. And, if you look at Roger Ebert's review of it, he hated this movie too, which was kind of interesting because he wrote a sequel to this movie.
What?
Yes, he did. A sequel that was nominated, I believe, for Best Screenplay.
I think you're right.
Yes, it was not Return to the Valley of the Dolls, but in the I can't remember the name of the sequel, but he wrote a sequel that was like one crazy movie. It looked like Clockwork Orange, only with actresses. It was bizarre. But anyway, he also did not like this movie. He thought this movie was trite, like most people thought it was trite. He thought it was a soap opera in all the worst ways. And he said it was a soap opera, not because of the over-the-top characters or the crazy plot points, but because the whole point of the movie was just to show that sex was dirty and that women who had sex were dirty women and that they deserved every rotten thing that ever happened to them, which really was an underlying theme of the movie. So not a great script. Story needed work. And Jacqueline Susann also famously hated the ending. The ending was sort of, we'll say, sanitized. And she was like, no. That is not the way it's supposed to happen, but it was. So she hated that. In spite of all of these issues, this movie was one of the top box office draws of 1967. One of the most popular films, one of the best money-making films of 1967. So there you have it.
Wow, that's a crazy ride. And
it was a crazy ride. It was a very crazy ride.
But it also goes to show you that, we as film critics, we want to do the best for our viewers and our followers and anyone who listens, to our experience in how we look at films and what we're hoping that we can convey to those people. It's just very interesting how a movie that looks like it's going to fail, a movie that looks like it's bound to be dragged through the dust, actually survives, and not just survives but thrives and becomes one of the more popular films of its time. Because again, just like anything else, what's the entertainment factor for those who are going to the movies to watch it? What's the buzz out there that makes people go to see anything? The advertisement, the way things are marketed, but also too that underlining marketing of one person sees it, another person sees it, and the domino effect, and also the fact that people just want to be entertained a lot of times, and all the political things that are going on within the film, or all the craziness that's going on with the film, is not totally their interest. And that's a good show here, in the sense that so many people watch it to make it so popular.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's wild and cool. I think,
yes.
Just like anything else, I think some critics go too far in voicing their opinion, but at the same time, not to be hypocritical, I think it's a good idea to see the films, try to, give a good accounting for what you saw, whether that's good or bad, and leave it very honestly. That's at least try to do that. And but always, we're going to look at films the way we want to look at them. We're going to look at films and voice our own opinion, but it's good to have kind of an educated assessment of what's going on in the film. But ironically, this film, no matter what negative things were being expressed, it went quite the opposite way. So that's pretty interesting.
Well, just for yucks, the screenplay that I was referring to that Roger Ebert wrote as a sequel to The Valley of the Dolls is called Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
Right.
It came out in 1970. It was not nominated for an Academy Award. I was wrong about that. But that was the screenplay, and he also conceived the story as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, in 1967, like a lot of different years, Vietnam was still being waged during the remainder of the 60s and even the early 70s. But it seems to me, as a child growing up, I never once felt that there wasn't some type of military presence around. Now, our father was in the Air Force during the Korean conflict, which was prior to Vietnam. And our dad really liked military films. And so me as a son, you know, hanging out with dad sometimes, and also mom, watching films, I ended up seeing a lot of military films. And, you know, just like anything else, during wartime, there's a lot of propaganda films that are out there. But this really wasn't that kind of film. So the film I want to introduce to you guys tonight is a film that I've probably seen 10 times easy. This film is called The Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen came out in 1967, and it starred Lee Marvin, Ernest Borgnine, Charles Bronson, John Cavas, I always say his name wrong, Cassavetes, there we go, and Jim Brown. And this is one of those films that looks at a different aspect of the military. The impossible feat that has to be facilitated throughout the film in any of these military films is, you know, you've got to, in one film, sink the Bismarck. You've got to climb the hills of the sands of Iwo Jima. Well, in this film, the mission was, we've got to kill as many German officers as we can to try to change this war effort and turn it around. But the question was, who'd be crazy enough to try to infiltrate the situation? Who would be crazy enough to send anybody? Who was crazy enough to come up with the idea? Well, all these things are mentioned in this film. The essence is that they had to find somebody crazy enough to do this kind of mission to try to assassinate en masse all these German generals and German officers. Well, Lee Marvin is the crazy person who plays a major in the United States Army given this task, but they don't want to deplete their forces. They want to find people who would be willing to volunteer, but no one really wants to volunteer for this. So the next thing they thought was, well, who's expendable? Now, that's a tragic thing in my eyes, that you're looking for people who you think are indispensable, and then, because that, you know, that's crazy. But they decide to do the next best thing. They go to the prisons, the military prisons, and find people who are murderers and thieves, and you know, to try to put together a group of people crazy enough to do this. So The Dirty Dozen is about that. Getting all these dregs of society, we'll say, that were in the military to actually do something for their country. And these are people that don't want to do anything. They've obviously shown their wares, but you know, if there's something out there that you can find that makes an impact, impassions people and empowers people, you never know what you're going to get. Well, in this case, The Dirty Dozen ends up being a group of people who are out there doing something to save the free world, we'll say, at the time. The Dirty Dozen is a really good film. I love Lee Marvin's character. He's very brash, very intelligent, and no nonsense kind of guy. And to put together this ragtag team of misfits, it takes a lot. And he shows a lot. He shows cunning. He shows a lot. They gave his character just pretty much everything, in my opinion, in watching this film. But what was really cool is to see how these men come together and form this bond that is a kind of strange bond in a way, but a bond nevertheless, in order for them to get this thing done. Because no matter what happens, even though you have people who are court-martialed and are going to be possibly executed, everyone still wants to live, but also to live the way you want to live. Well, here's a situation where they're given another opportunity, a second chance to do something for their country, but also to do something for themselves. And as the movie continues on, you find that the camaraderie extends to other service people who are trying to help them. and it comes out to be a very, very good film. And with all the things that happen in their journey to try to pretty much do what seems to be impossible, you find that you become more and more endearing to all these different characters, and it turns out to be a really good film. And I implore you to watch this film. If you've never seen The Dirty Dozen, I think it's worth watching. I think it's worth sitting there and paying very close attention to the servicemen when the movie begins, at the middle of the film, and how the movie ends. It is a growth. It is a maturing, to say the least. Dirty Dozen, worth watching, Karen. Uh-oh, lost volume. Can't hear you.
Sorry, my mic, my microphone was muted.
Oh, no worries.
Yes, it's definitely worth watching. And if you can't watch the 1967 version of The Dirty Dozen, the least you can do is watch the 2000 remake known as Chicken Run, the live action cartoon about the chickens who escape from the chicken coop. That is a remake of The Dirty Dozen. And I can see by the look of shock on Greg's face, he doesn't quite know what to make of that, but it's really true.
Okay, I heard crickets at first, but okay.
It was that, and it was sort of that, and a combination between that and Stalag 17, but it was definitely The Dirty Dozen was also part of that.
Oh, very interesting.
I'll also mention that not only is the film very well done, it's probably on some levels a miracle that the film actually got made. Lee Marvin, who starred in the film, had a chronic alcoholism problem, and it was a constant problem during filming. In fact, Charles Bronson, who's also in this movie, also has a starring role in this movie, got so mad that about Lee Marvin showing up drunk all the time that he threatened to punch him out if he did not stop doing that. Delays and other issues with production kept the filming going on much longer than it was supposed to. And Jim Brown, who was in the movie, was actually under contract to, play for the Cleveland Browns. I believe he played for the Cleveland Browns.
I was gonna come in the back door with that one too.
Yeah,
Cleveland Browns, and he was under contract, and he actually decided to retire.
Right, because the NFL threatened to suspend him if he didn't leave the filming, which was going on far longer than it needed to. If he didn't leave the filming, they said, we are going to fine and suspend you if you don't bring your butt back here to football camp. And Jim Brown's like, I'll see you a fine and suspension. I'll raise your resignation. How about that? That must have been the shot heard around the world, because he was considered the greatest, if one of the greatest, if not the greatest NFL football player. He was at the top of his game when he left the game in 1966. And, they shouldn't have said that, I guess.
Now think about this, and I'll put one more football point in there to extend that slightly. So he left in the 60s. It took the 1980s before his record was broken. 20 plus years before his record was broken by none other than Walter Payton from Chicago.
All right. Chi-Town. Sweet.
Yeah.
So
and Sweetness, that's what his nickname was.
And Sweetness, right, exactly. So yeah. Very interesting. The other thing is that Lee Marvin kind of trash talked about the film. I mean, he liked being in the film. It was a great paycheck, but he thought this movie's crazy. In the first place, this has nothing to do with what war is really like. And he was in World War II, so he wanted the film to more realistically depict what was happening, what really happened in war, and this film wasn't it. And the other thing he said was that most of the actors that were hired were too old to play soldiers. So he wasn't happy about that either. But all in all, it was a great paycheck, and you know, he, was probably drunk for most of it. So, whatever.
Despite that, it's a really good movie.
Despite that, it's a really good movie.
It is a really good movie, though. So what else you got, kid?
Well, my next film is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And
I just went and, I'm sorry, I interrupted. My wife and I just went and saw a stage play of that very same. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Oh, really?
It was really good.
It is. It's one of my favorite movies, not only because it was so daring at the time that that it was released. It was quite daring, but also because of the people who were in the movie. I mean, some of the greatest actors, some of the greatest character actors, and really some of the greatest actors working in the industry at that time were part of this film. And I'm not talking about Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy specifically, although I would include them. But I'm not talking about them. I'm not even talking about Sidney Poitier. I'm talking about Bea Richards, who played Sidney Poitier's mother, Roy Glenn, who played Sidney Poitier's father. I'm talking about somebody else that I was talking about. Lee Grant. No, I'm sorry, I'm not talking about Lee Grant. I'm not talking about Lee Grant. I'm talking about, I thought I had this queued up and I didn't. And I was doing so well. Okay. Sorry, I had a technical issue there. I'm talking about Cecil Kellaway, who played Monsignor Ryan, and Isabel Sanford. That's who I was trying to remember.
Isabel Sanford played the maid.
Who played Tilly the maid, and Virginia Christine, who played Hilary St. George, but became famous after this movie as the woman who appeared in commercials for Folgers coffee, good to the last drop. She was very well known for appearing in those commercials.
Cool.
So yeah, a lot of really interesting people in this movie, great actors. The other thing that it's notable for is that it's Spencer Tracy's last film. He was sick while he filmed this movie. He called upon everything that he had in him to finish this film, and he died after this film was finished. This movie, in my opinion, I mean, and let me just say what the movie's about for those of us, for those in the audience who may not know what this is about, but it really is about someone who comes to dinner, not necessarily welcome. So here you have, in the 1960s, you've got Sidney Poitier, who plays a doctor, who is brilliant and kind and nice and downright near perfect, and who also suffered the tragedy of having his wife and children taken from him in a car accident. He is a doctor for the United Nations and extremely prestigious in his field, and he goes off to Hawaii for an R&R. He meets Katherine Houghton, who plays let's see, the name of her character is Christina Drayton. And Christina Drayton is the daughter of Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, who are the Draytons. He's Matt Drayton, Katharine Hepburn is Christina Drayton, and Katherine Houghton plays Joey Drayton. And she's like a 20-something woman who is in Hawaii at the time, meets Sidney Poitier, and they fall in love. And then she brings him home to dinner. That's what happens. But of course, what she doesn't mention to anyone is that Sidney Poitier is an African American, or as they would say in 1967, a Negro. She just kind of just doesn't mention that part. She just says, Mom, I met this great guy. I want to bring him home for dinner. And her mother's, Katharine Hepburn, is totally thrilled. I can't wait to meet him. Bring him by. And the father's like, awesome. You know, he's running a newspaper. He's a liberal journalist, liberal publisher of a newspaper, has been on the front lines of the civil rights movement for these many years. So, of course, he's going to be thrilled that his daughter's marrying a Negro. Oh, no, he isn't. Whoa, 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 whoa. Back that up. We need to take another turn around the block with this one. You cannot marry a Negro, he says to her, or he basically grumps around, but he's grumping around because he's really annoyed and upset and scared also that his daughter has taken this completely drastic step without saying anything. His wife, Katharine Hepburn, points out to him more than once in the movie that, we taught Joey not to look at color. We taught her that people were equal, that they should be treated with dignity and respect, and that they were all worthy of love. And we never said a word about color. We never said, unless he's a Black man. We never said that to her. So why are you surprised that she's acting on what we taught her? Well, Spencer Tracy doesn't have a good answer for that. And a lot of comic relief is provided between Monsignor Ryan, who's ably played by Cecil Kellaway, and Tilly, who's amazingly played by Isabel Sanford, because Isabel Sanford is probably madder than anybody else that Joey has brought this Negro home. Because guess what? She's mad that he doesn't know his place, that he's being uppity. Doesn't he know that he's a Negro? Why can't he find a good Black woman to marry? Why does he have to go around flirting with this woman? And, she thinks of Joey Drayton as a daughter, and she's scared to death that Sidney Poitier is going to ruin her life because they're going to be in this dangerous situation. People are going to hate them. They're going to be targets, and their lives are just going to be ruined. That's the undercurrent of what's going on. Now, this movie, written in 1967, in my opinion, in a number of ways, does not stand the test of time, although the overarching themes of the movie certainly stand the test of time. Here's an ironic fun fact. In the same year that this movie was released was the same year that the Supreme Court handed down the landmark decision of Loving versus Virginia, which, guess what? Struck down all state laws that banned interracial marriage. Because before Loving versus Virginia, you could be arrested and thrown in jail if as a white person you married a Black person, or if as a Black person you married a white person. And that's exactly what happened with Richard and Mildred Loving. They both, she was actually thrown in jail more than he was, but they were torn apart. They were separated by Virginia state government because they married each other. That was the unpardonable sin. And the Supreme Court struck down those laws. They were called miscegenation laws in 1967, the same year that this movie came out. But here's what we have here. We have Joey Drayton, who suffers from a lot of shortcomings that women's roles were starting to develop in the 1960s, because she doesn't bring much to the table except that she's, kind of blonde. She has a perfect figure. She seems to be blissfully unaware that anything could possibly go wrong, because in her head, the world's perfect, but why wouldn't it be? She's grown up wealthy, sheltered. She can have anything that she wants. Why would she think anything could go wrong? And just because she wants to marry a Negro, well, the world should just fall in line. So that her character is the least developed and probably the most, the one that just falls by the wayside. It's the least interesting of all the characters. Then you've got Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy, like I said, is the liberal who has to come face to face with his own hypocrisy, because he never in a million years thought that his daughter would actually marry somebody who was Black. And then you've got Katharine Hepburn, who has concerns, but she wants her daughter to be happy. She sees that her daughter's happy, and she thinks, you know, well, if the world's not in line, to hell with the world. Who cares what the world thinks? It's really nobody's business but theirs. So you've got these people just sort of colliding. And then you've got Cecil Calloway, who, you know, just kind of tries to jostle Matt Drayton out of his ill humor by making jokes and sort of, you know, nudging him toward where he really should be. And then you've got Tilly, which just her character, I think, serves to just highlight the double standard. You know, you've got white people who think Black people are inferior, and guess what? You have Black people who think Black people are inferior too. And there's one of my favorite speeches in all of moviedom. It's when Sidney Poitier faces his father. The Sidney Poitier character, John Prentice, is very, very hard on his parents. They show up for dinner because they come to dinner too, until he's like, crap, how many people do I have to make dinner for? And they show up, and, you know, B. Richards feels very much a kinship with Christina Drayton. Almost right away. And she's only known as Mrs. Prentice. And then Sidney Poitier's father, Mr. Prentice, has the same misgivings about this upcoming marriage that Matt Drayton does, because he's worried that his son's going to be lynched, basically. Matt Drayton's worried that his daughter's going to be defiled. I think that's really what's going on. It's like, how could you go to bed with a Black man? Oh my God. And what kind of world are your children going to be living in? And they're just going to be like harangued and harassed and, you know, murdered. That's his worry. But Sidney Poitier's father is worried that his son is just going to be a target, that he's literally going to be lynched, which was a very real possibility, not only in 1967. But there's a great moment where John Prentice and his father are talking, and the father's like, I don't understand. How could you do this? He's basically saying that. And John Prentice, as Sidney Poitier, comes back at him and he says, you know, let me start from the beginning. The father says something like, you know, you owe me. I was a postman. Do you know how many miles I carried my post bag for you? Do you know how hard I had to work to send you to college? And I was proud to do it. And do you know how proud I was when you accepted this award and that award and you became a doctor? And I sacrificed so much for you. And Sidney Poitier comes back to him and says, I know what you sacrificed for me. And guess what? I don't care. You were supposed to do that. You're my father. You brought me into this world. You owe me. I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you a damn thing. You owe me everything because you're the one who brought me into this world. And then he says, there's a huge difference between you and me. You think of yourself as a colored man. I think of myself as a man. And I love that whole dialogue, especially the part where he tells his father that his father owed him. And baby boomers grew up with the whole notion that we owed our parents, you know, that, oh, you know, thank you, parents, for making all these sacrifices. Thank you so much for everything you've done for me. And this is the first movie where the son, you know, the child was like, screw that. I didn't ask to be brought into this world. If you brought me into this world, you better have been prepared to do everything you needed to do to make sure that I got what I needed to survive in this world. And if you didn't, then you were a crappy parent. So I love that. There are other really fine moments, comedic moments, and other just poignant moments in this movie. The perfection of Sidney Poitier as a character does not stand the test of time, and his character is probably the second least interesting of them all. The airheadedness and bubbly, blissfully unaware quality that that the Joey Drayton character shows does not stand the test of time. But the rest of the characters kind of do. Even in 2017, you could find a Mr. Prentice, the Roy Glenn character. You can find Mrs. Prentice as B. Richards. And I love her speech where she says to Spencer Tracy, she says to him, what happens to men when they grow old? When she's asking him, how could you be against this marriage? How could you know that you're going to make your daughter miserable for the rest of her life, and yet you insist on being against this marriage? Well, you know, Tracy thinks he's doing it for the greater good, and B. Richards is like, but where does love fit into this? You know, what happens to men when they grow old, especially when sexual things no longer matter? You forget everything. You forget the romance. You forget the tenderness, the poignancy, the connection between two people that have pledged to share and spend their lives together. And I'm ashamed of you. You and my husband, she says. I'm ashamed of both of you for being so hard-hearted. So really interesting movie. It's definitely worth watching. It won a couple of Academy Awards. The screenplay is very well done. The music is interesting. The setting is quite good. Catherine Houghton is actually the niece of Katharine Hepburn, and she played Joey Drayton. It's definitely worth a look. Just, you know, be aware of the time, you know, the sort of issues that don't stand the test of time, but also try to take a larger look at the overall issues that the movie represents, because some of them are still relevant today.
Very cool. Good movie. And although I enjoyed being able to see the stage play too, the movie itself has always been one of my favorites as well. I actually was a fan of Sidney Poitier too, but I was more of a fan early on with Spencer Tracy. I had seen a lot of movies with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn when they were much younger people. And so I always enjoyed their acting ability, and I was no different in this movie. So yeah, very good movie. Well, I chose another movie that I had seen as a child. It was kind of funny. A lot of these movies I saw probably maybe 5 years later. But one of the movies that struck me as interesting was a movie with Paul Newman. This movie was a Western. I watched a lot of Westerns growing up, and this was one of those Westerns that it took me aback because it made me think more. You know, some Westerns, I think a lot of film that we watch is just purely for entertainment, and whatever genre you like is a lot of times where you end up. And we're hoping with this show that you end up in different places to be able to take advantage of the cool films that have other niches. But going back to the Westerns, me growing up, I really kind of bought into that heroism, that camaraderie, man and horse, man and man, man and wife, you know, on and on. But this is one of those movies that was a little different. This movie hit me with regard to diversity, hit me with regard to racism. Now, as Black people growing up in America, Afrocentric people growing up in America, whatever you want to call it, you know, there are different types of people out there who, you know, will do what they can to not make you feel comfortable in your own skin. Well, this is one of those movies. However, in this case, this is a person who is part white and part Native American. And the issues that he has to go through in order to live and survive. A very soft-spoken, quiet-natured person in one form, but very rugged and very virile in another. So the name of this movie that Paul Newman is in is called Hombre. Um, Paul Newman plays John Russell. John Russell is living amongst the Native Americans because that's what he chose to do, because he felt more comfortable. He felt more of a camaraderie and more fitting in, we'll say, because being a half-breed, he wasn't accepted by the other side of his lineage, which is the Caucasian side of his lineage. So he chose to live with the people that made sense to him, and he was thriving. But something happens that changes all that. Something that happens, that's a natural thing that happens to all of us at some point. A relative passes away, in this case, his father. And so now he's given information that you are mentioned in the will. You are inheriting something that's not of the free and open plains. You're inheriting something that's the actual physical property owned by his father, left to him, the heir, the sole heir. And so now he needs to come to grips with not just his Native American side, now he has to come to grips with his white side. And so it is something that he's not comfortable in doing, but yet he needs to try to embrace it. So the film really is basically him coming into this situation and how he's going to deal with it. Now, in the midst of this, he has to, get to the situation. So he's on a stagecoach with these people, and these people are looking down on him. Definitely not someone that they want to deal with. They really don't want to be in the stagecoach with him, but circumstances are what they are. Now, the irony about situations like this is, in many cases, and even in looking at the world in general, we rely on each other every day, all day. It is part of our humanity. I think for those people who are religious in scope, it is part of our gift is to be there and be service to others. And with that being said, it makes less sense to defile or show disdain or lack of respect to people who you don't know may in some day be your saving grace, depending on a circumstance or a situation. That's what this whole movie is about. How people look at other people and don't realize that this may be the person or persons that will change your life in a positive way. And you need to be open for that. And this movie talks about the lack of openness and not thinking outside the box and not being respectful and showing a great disrespect to people just because of ethnicity, just because of lack of their diversity. So that's an interesting thing. Even as a child, I felt in this film. And I think this, as Karen was talking about standing the test of time, this is a film that invokes that same kind of negativity, in the sense that if we were more humane, we would have less situations and less problems and a lot more togetherness. So this is that kind of movie. Really like this movie. This stars Paul Newman, Frederick March, Richard Boone. I mean, it's just a very, very all-encompassing film. And it was a film that came out in 1967 and a Western that you wouldn't necessarily have expected. And I like this movie because it shows you that it's not always a reciprocal reaction to disrespect. Sometimes other people show their humanity, even if you're not. So really like this film. I really, really think people should watch this movie.
Sounds like it. And it's something, I mean, I've seen Hombre before, but I guess I'd forgotten it had been made in 1967 to begin with. And it's, when I think about the movies that really make a difference in terms of commentary on the social condition, Hombre is not one of the first movies that comes to mind, but it really should, you know, kind of be higher up in the lexicon of those movies that should be considered when looking at the ones that comment on the American social condition. It's as relevant as a number of any other movies that you could name.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a good film.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I really like Paul Newman in it.
Yeah, Paul Newman was wonderful in that film.
Yep.
Cool. Well,
so you said you had 3 films, right, Karen?
Yes, I do. My next film is In the Heat of the Night. And I'll just confess to a great deal of bias in favor of this film just from the outset. It is one of my all-time favorite films ever. I have an original movie poster from this movie hanging on my wall today. So that's how strongly I feel about this film. And I love the tagline for this movie. They got a murder on their hands. They don't know what to do with it. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. It's a murder mystery, plain and simple. But here's a little bit of trivia. Lee Grant received a Best Supporting Actress nomination for her role in this film, but she was also in Valley of the Dolls. She played the sister of Sharon Tate's husband, and she played the shrew of a woman who just did everything she could to keep Sharon Tate and her husband apart because she knew that her brother had a terminal illness that no one had known about. And she was definitely afraid that they were going to have children and pass that illness on to them. So Lee Grant was in Valley of the Dolls, released in 1967, and she was also in The Heat of the Night in a much smaller role, also released in 1967. In 1960, it's a very important part, but generally speaking, in terms of number of lines, it's a smaller role. But she plays the wife of an industrialist who is looking to construct a factory in Sparta, Mississippi. And the whole point of that factory was not only to bring jobs to the area, but it was also going to bring jobs to the Negroes and the whites. Like they were going to be treated equally, and they were going to have to apply for jobs and compete equally, which was unheard of. So before the factory could get off the ground good, the man is killed. The man who wants to spearhead this project is killed. And Lee Grant, as his widow, wants to find out who murdered her husband. Not at all an unreasonable request. And so she is farting around with Rod Steiger, who plays the sheriff of Sparta, Mississippi. And he's like, yeah, we need to find out who did this. And, this is very important. I think we're going to get somebody right away. And at the same time, you've also got William Shallard, who plays the mayor of Sparta, Mississippi, who's saying, I wasn't that crazy about the way that this guy was going to set this factory up with like Negroes and whites being treated equally and all. But at the same time, I don't want to get calls from the governor about how we could have this rich man killed in my town and how I just let it happen. So you need to find who killed this man, but quick. So here's the sheriff. He's at sixes and sevens because he's getting all this pressure from the higher ups to find somebody quick. He's got the widow staring at him saying, "You racist bastard, I know you're going to find some poor black man and, accuse him, even though that man won't have had anything to do with my husband's murder. And then you've got, the whites who are kind of secretly cheering that this, integrationist and this carpetbagger got killed. And then you've got the blacks who, last hope for Sparta, Mississippi, for jobs in Sparta, Mississippi, went right down the drain along with the murder of this man. So all of these competing priorities. And in comes Virgil Tibbs, who's a police detective in Philadelphia, but he's not on the job. He's off duty. His mother comes from Sparta, Mississippi. He's there visiting his mama, like any good, brought up boy would do. And he's there visiting, and somehow news gets out about this murder. And his captain gets in touch with him and says, you really ought to help them solve this murder because you're a forensic expert. They don't even know what forensics is in Sparta, Mississippi, because no one knows what forensics is. It hasn't even been invented yet, but whatever it is, you're the expert, and they need your expertise. And Sidney Poitier is like, man, I don't have time for that. I just came to visit my mother. I need to get back on a train, get back to the north where I belong. Well, he and the sheriff cross paths, and they don't get along. They can't stand each other. The sheriff's a racist bastard who, and Sidney Poitier, who thinks Sidney Poitier is this uppity Negro who has no business even breathing air, let alone actually speaking intelligently and telling white people what to do. And Sidney Poitier thinks it's, Rod Steiger's character is this hick who has no more business wearing a badge than, nursery school children have, planning war campaigns. So they don't get along. They don't get along at all. But throughout the course of the film, and this is what the film does so brilliantly, you have these people at polar opposites, but they have a common goal for different reasons. Sidney Poitier needs to find the man or the people or the persons, whoever killed this industrialist, because he's been told to by his captain and because something wrong happened here. And at the end of the day, as a police detective, his DNA is to help people and to right wrongs. That's his DNA. So he can't let it go. You've got Rod Steiger, who doesn't really care that much about race relations because he's a bigot. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But at the same time, he also has this sense of right and wrong. He, at the end of the day, also wants to find out who killed this person because that person shouldn't have been killed on his watch. Mm-hmm. And he also feels like he doesn't want to get these calls. He wants to prove to these higher ups, who he also really, at the end of the day, really doesn't respect because they're political toadies. He wants to show them that he can do his job and that he doesn't need them to tell him what to do and when. So they're cross purposes, but they come together for this common goal. And it's a classic mechanism when it comes to, it's a classic literary device, it's a classic film device. We plow this field over and over again because it works. So you've got that. And you've got different characters, war notes, plays of, just two shades left of corrupt Southern sheriff. And, but at the same time, he's like an affable guy. And as time goes on, he can't help seeing that Sidney Poitier kind of actually knows what he's talking about. And Rod Steiger is just completely incensed about that. But at the same time, Rod Steiger sees that too. And they, so they end up aligning, however gingerly, to find out what really happened here. And they both teach, Rod Steiger's character and Sidney Poitier's character teach each other a lot. And you would think that the teaching would be one way, that Sidney Poitier would do all the teaching because Rod Steiger's the bigot. And what could he possibly have to teach Sidney Poitier? But he actually does have things to teach Sidney Poitier. And what they are, I'm still haven't quite figured out yet, but he does have things to teach Sidney Poitier. And, and so because they learned from each other, you have this mutual respect that is just a beautiful thing to see on film, especially in 1967, when that sort of thing didn't happen very much, especially when one of the stars was an African American. Sidney Poitier was one of the few people who could, it seemed like with ease, but it did not at all come easy, transcend the incredible barriers that excluded actors of color from anything like a film career. The fact that he was able to have a film career completely defied anything like expectations. The man came to the United States and could not even read English. Mm-hmm. And not only that, he worked as a dishwasher, and he taught himself to read, and he taught himself to act. And by the sheer force of will and his talent, he managed to carve a career of film and a career in film when people with far greater attributes and assets than he had couldn't get anywhere. Mm-hmm. So it was, and it's really, and then when you see them on film, you see why it happened that way. Now, this film was nominated for a number of Academy Awards. Sterling Silliphant wrote the screenplay, and he won the Academy Award for that. Norman Jewison directed the film. He was nominated for Best Director. He did not win that year, but he was nominated. Rod Steiger won for Best Supporting, for Best Actor of 1967 for his role as Sheriff Gillespie in this film. Sidney Poitier was not at all nominated for an Academy Award. Mm-hmm. He was nominated for a Golden Globe. He didn't win. But that was it for Sidney Poitier's recognition by the industry of what he did. Here's something
to tell me. They call me Mr. Tears. They made not one, not two, but 3 movies with Sidney Poitier as the same character. I'm sorry, my voice went southern.
Yes, I know. I know.
As the same character, and he did not get nominated?
No, he was not nominated.
Well,
and
shucks.
I know. And here's something else. This movie was supposedly set in Mississippi. This film was not filmed anywhere near Mississippi. It was filmed in Sparta, Illinois, because of the significant racial tensions which existed in Mississippi at the time. And believe me, these people didn't care what star was there. They were all in danger from racist thugs. And so they did a few scenes in Tennessee because they needed scenes of a plantation, and there weren't any in Illinois. But most of the film was shot in Sparta, Illinois. And why did they choose Sparta, Illinois? Because the film was set in Sparta, Mississippi, and if they filmed in Sparta, Illinois, they didn't have to change the street signs.
Right.
So,
Sparta. Yep.
But there was significant concerns about security. Sidney Poitier slept with a gun under his pillow during the filming of this movie while he was on set, because he was that concerned about somebody coming after him. Mm-hmm. And here's the other thing. There is the scene between a plantation owner, Mr. Endicott, and Sidney Poitier. They start out very cordially because Sidney Poitier, Virgil Tibbs, has an interest in plants and really admires Endicott's collection of orchids in his greenhouse. Endicott, who's this wealthy plantation owner, I mean, it really was a plantation, although they didn't call it that back then. They didn't call it that in the 1960s. Is also sort of beguiled at first by Virgil Tibbs' interest in orchids and plants, and then Endicott starts opining how the orchid is like the Negro, and how, just like orchids are subservient when they're treated right, Negroes tend to be subservient too. And this is when Virgil Tibbs is sort of opining dares to question Endicott about his role in the slaying of this factory builder who is the victim. Dares to question him. And Endicott hauls off and slaps Sidney Poitier. And Sidney Poitier slaps him right back. That was the slap heard around the world, because white audiences were shocked in 1967 that even made it onto the screen. That had never, ever happened before in film. Never, ever, ever, ever. So that was one. Two, Sidney Poitier had to fight to make sure that scene got in the film for two reasons. One, the film is based on the book In the Heat of the Night, and that scene didn't exist. Two, Sidney Poitier knew there was going to be a lot of pressure to cut that scene out. And he said, you better not, because I'm not doing this film without that scene. He fought for that scene to stay in the movie. And it literally was the first scene where a Black person actually fought back against a white person, just treating them as if they're property. The other thing that was noteworthy was that the cinematographer, who is, what is his name? I had his name, Haskell Wexler. The other thing that's noteworthy is that Haskell Wexler's cinematography was the first time that a cinematographer actually adjusted lighting to account for darker skin tones. Before that had never happened, not in Gone with the Wind, not in any other movies that had Black actors, and the majority of the cast was white, much like In the Heat of the Night, because Sidney Poitier was one of the few Black people in this film. Bea Richards played his mother, also another tip of the hat, because she played his mother in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. She played his mother in the Heat of the Night, but there weren't that many Black people in this movie. But Haskell Wexler made it a point to ensure that Sidney Poitier was shown in the appropriate lighting situation. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting. And it's a brilliant movie. I could go on and on and on about this movie. You probably couldn't tell that, but I could, because it's just so well done. Rod Steiger, I think he deserved the Academy Award because his acting was absolutely brilliant. And it takes real acting chops to create a character who is basically, racist, as ignorant as the day is long, but at the same time, smart, poignant, and you end up rooting for the man. How do you do that with somebody who comes off as so reprehensible at first? And then you've got Sidney Poitier, who I think should have gotten an Academy Award nomination. I think that's one of the great misses of the Academy, that they did not nominate that man, because his acting was just as pristine and was just as difficult, because he needed to create a very effective foil against Gillespie and against all the other characters, basically him against everybody else in the movie except for Lee Grant. So that took some acting chops too, which did not go recognized, unfortunately, by the Academy. It's a brilliant movie. The screenplay is brilliant. The filming is amazing. It's one of the best movies ever made, I think, in American cinema. So definitely worth the time and the look.
One other thing I thought was interesting, and maybe I could be wrong, you can correct me. The carpetbagger who was killed, did he come from Detroit or Chicago?
Detroit.
So, very interesting.
Yes, they came from Detroit.
Well, I have another movie as well, Karen. This one is I think it's a very good movie. Um, Definitely a favorite of mine, but even more so a favorite of my wife, who likes this film, because the lead actor, or one of the lead actors in the film, is one of her favorite actors. Um, the movie I'm talking about um, is the St. Valentine's Day Massacre,
Hmm.
which came out in 1967. And this stars Jason Robards, which my wife is a big fan of Jason Robards. And when you're talking about organized crime, it seems to me in my short lifetime, that it's brought up a lot. And there's only a certain few cities that are brought up in the majority of the time. And one of those cities is Chicago. Being from Chicago, going abroad for whatever reason, and when people find out that you're from Chicago, in fact, I experienced this in college when I went away to college, and people were talking about where they were from, and someone said, "Well, where are you from?" I said, "Oh, I'm from Chicago," and someone literally said to me, "Oh, like Al Capone," the machine gun sound, and I'm thinking to myself, "Okay, Al Capone, that was like the 1920s and the early 30s. Wow." Um, in the 80s, you're still thinking and associating the city of Chicago by name to one of the most ruthless gangsters of all time. That being said, back to the film. It's a good film. Whenever there's gang violence in Chicago, whether it be past, present, and sadly to say any future, um, it always seems to stem and go back to the Roaring Twenties. This is the time when prohibition was put into effect, and if you don't know, prohibition is basically they decided that um, liquor was a vice, and so they wanted to squash it quickly. So they put in prohibition laws to prevent people from um, having liquor, and they did all this damage to all these different distilleries, and all it did was make crime more profitable because now the criminals say, "Hey, here's something we can use to make money." Well, if the people and the public and the laws don't want it, we're in. And, and so the essence of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and what brings this to a head is there's two sides of Chicago back then as far as the major strength of the crime family scenario is. There was the North Gang and the South Gang. And the North Gang was run by Bugs Moran, and the South Gang was run by Al Capone. Two mortal enemies, two guys who felt, they were fine until they felt, hey, I can make more money if I use this and get that from your end. And the other guy saying, yeah, I can make more money and be more profitable if I get that from your end, causing all these skirmishes and quote unquote wars. Now, jumping back to the 80s real quickly, a recording group made a song called The Night Chicago Died.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of the group is Paper Lace. They had probably about 4 major hits all total throughout their career, their band's career. But this song, The Night Chicago Died, it really took off in the city of Chicago. I can't tell you what happened outside of the city of Chicago, living in the city, growing up in the city. This song was a big deal and it was on the radio, it seemed like every day.
Mm-hmm.
But the essence of the song talks about not just the the criminals in the north and the south side. It also talks about the people who are stuck in the middle, the people who are in between, and not just the people, but the police department. One of the problems in gangland violence back in that time was corrupt people. it was easy for certain gangs to do certain things because they had their hands in the pockets of the police. And this is one of those rare occasions where they also had their hands in the mayor's pocket. The mayor was reelected because he didn't care about anything. He just wanted to be elected, make his money, and he made money from both sides. So all this corruption is going on in the 1920s and the early 30s in Chicago. So Al Capone is fed up with having to deal with the Moran gang, and he's got to figure out a way to hedge his bets, get what he wants. And Capone was one of those guys historically, even from a child to the time when he's in his 30s in 1920. And 1929 is when this actually happened. Forget trying to organize. He wanted to wipe them out totally. So the St. Valentine's Day Massacre is one of those situations where, just like anything else, when the holidays come up, you know, we work hard during the week, we work hard during, you know, every month, every year, and we cherish and relish the holidays. Well, Valentine's Day is a day of love, peace, happiness. And even then, back then, you'd be surprised how quote unquote pious a lot of these gangs were. You know, Moran's gang was kind of more of an Irish gang, and of course Capone's was more of an Italian gang. And whatever other cultures and or what do I want to call it? Loyalties, kind of people who were in between kind of figured out which game they needed to you know, gravitate toward and be a part of. So this is a time of love and everything, and so your guard is down. Many of the situations where, you know, like the gangs didn't want to have prostitution, we'll say, because that was immoral, because that was against the church, even though shooting somebody down in the street was no big deal. So with all those things being said, now you have a situation where someone coming up with a good idea at the time they felt in order to rid themselves of the competition. Enter the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Al Capone has an idea, something that's going to help his gang. And this movie culminates in that on a day where no one's paying attention. A shot is heard, but it wasn't one of those situations where you're hearing all these Tommy guns going off in the street. There's a ruse, kind of like the Trojan horse that happens in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. One of the things about this, and I'm throwing these names out there like Al Capone and Bugs Moran, this is a biopic. These people really existed in our society. And the things that they go through and the things that they went through in both the theatrical St. Valentine's Day Massacre and the documentary St. Valentine's Day Massacre, you show that there's quite a bit of parallels, and you see that, I guess in my opinion, it's St. Valentine's Day, but how heartless people really are, and how greed can make you do things that are not natural. And so the St. Valentine's Day Massacre basically is kind of like a Trojan horse scenario, as I alluded to a moment ago, that brings a demise of quite a few people. And enough of a situation that now you know who's boss in the town of Chicago. I think the St. Valentine's Day Massacre is a very good film to give you an understanding of the biopic of these actual real people. Jason Robards, you've got George Siegel's in this, Ralph Meeker. I mean, there's quite a few. Bruce Dern in this movie. Um, just a cavalcade of a lot of people in this film, actors of the time that were pretty decent actors. And I think Jason Robards does a good job in convincing us that he is that Al Capone character. I've seen a few other films that have Al Capone characters in it. I didn't see a better Al Capone character until Robert De Niro played Al Capone in The Untouchables. And he not just gave you the feeling of what that type of persona was, but his physicality resembled that of the real Al Capone. I think that's a lot of, um, for lack of a better way of saying it, a lot of devotion toward trying to portray a character so that those people watching the film would have as authentic a character portrayal of a real person. I give kudos to Robert De Niro for that. But also in this film, Jason Robards playing that maniacal and blood crazy, seemingly, Al Capone to try to get his way, to try to win this city of Chicago. Chicago's going through a lot of turmoil now because of gang violence. But let's be real, even the early lineage of our city that I grew up in still has that lingering Al Capone to this day. To this day. So very good film to watch, very important film to watch. Now, it probably didn't get as high a rating, and there wasn't really any nominations per se to be aware of, but at the same time, it doesn't diminish the importance of this film in film and diminish the importance of this film in history. So I appreciate the 1967 for this film because this is a good one.
It sure is. I remember seeing that movie. And I mean, it's violent. It's, it's hard to watch from that standpoint, although, it's hard to watch, but it's still relatively mild considering what passes for violence in movies these days.
Yes.
But the interplay between like Moran and Capone and, their like assorted gang members is pretty interesting to watch. So it's a very watchable film as far as I'm concerned. I've seen it more than once.
Yeah. I think I've seen it like 3 times. I think my wife maybe more. And I'll probably take a look at it again in the near future. But impressive, a lot better than, it's funny, every time you watch a film, you see something different. But there's been a good space of time between the times that I've seen it that it felt like I was watching it for the first time. So that was good.
Yeah, Ralph Meeker played Bugs Moran, and he's just like an amazing, like he's not at the top of like, oh, top stars of, whatever list. I mean, he worked more in the, like the 30s, 40s, but as a character actor. And this was like a major role that's sort of, I mean, basically, I guess you need a good character actor because you're playing this gangster, but it was a huge role in his as far as his career is concerned. And Joseph Campanella is also in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of people in this film and that you'll recognize when you see them. Who are some of them, fortunately, are still acting today.
Yeah, I love Bruce Stern. I think he's one of the best actors around. He's always been just eminently watchable, even when he was doing horrible things in the movie.
It's funny because he's one of my favorite villains, that's for sure. And one of the worst villainous essence films that he was in was The Cowboys with John Wayne. And to me, I wanted, if I could throw a tomato through a screen and hit him in the head, that's what I wanted to do because that's how mad he made me during that film. And to me, if you can be such a bad guy and make me want to throw a tomato at you, that's telling me that you're doing a good job. You're doing a stellar job.
Right.
And
No
he
matter how much
just,
it hurts.
yeah, it was just, he's one of those characters that does that. And I've always liked Bruce Stern, whether he plays a good guy or a bad guy. But you know, majority of the characters that he played were, if not a bad guy, a bad principled person.
Yeah, they were. He was at best he was ethically ambiguous.
Yes. Yeah. Whereas, of course, Joseph Campanella, I just love him. He was just, you know, if he wasn't just the kindest guy, he was the most righteous guy
Right.
in film. So that's kind of that him. But the guy who I really thought was interesting and who I liked in this film, and you see him very early on in the film. In fact, I think he's pretty much in the early scenes of this movie, is George Segal.
Mm-hmm.
I think George Segal is a very underrated actor.
Yeah, I agree.
And he was able to play. Yeah, he's able to play so many different roles. His roles have always been very diverse, and maybe that's just good picking by him and his agent, falling into something. And he's always had that ability to play a straight guy, the fall guy, the tough guy, like in this film.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think his picture is like the main picture that shows a Tommy gun in the movie poster. And then
Rosenberg in this movie.
yeah. So, but now he's on television as a grandfather, and it's comedic. So here's a stretch of this guy's ability to act and be able to be convincing in all these different roles. I just think he was underrated.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree.
Well, that's what I had for the films that I wanted people to pay a lot more of attention to in the 1960s, and then this specific 1967. But there's a lot of other great films out there that people should see. You know, it's funny, neither one of us picked The Graduate.
I know.
I think The Graduate has such a following, I will say, and people talk about it all the time. And that's probably why I chose not to really talk about it in general. But I think it's a good movie. And if you don't know very much about Dustin Hoffman, you get a bit, and my favorite, Anne Bancroft, you get a good sense of them in this film.
Never liked The Graduate. I mean, and it has nothing to do with the movie specifically. It's because the movie is well done.
Mm-hmm.
And great lines, you know, plastics, you know, the thing. And then, you know, Dustin Hoffman's just incredible acting job. But Anne Bancroft just really practically stole that movie from everybody else. She was so good in that movie. So no, it's not that. It just isn't a favorite movie of mine. And like you said, it's been, you know, it's at the risk of just like talking it to death. We both kind of skipped it. It wouldn't, I mean, for us, when we were talking about films of 1967, there's so many other films that we could talk about, but I focused on those ones that were not only significant, but were also meant something to me personally. And The Graduate never resonated with me personally.
Right, and I get that. And I think that's a lot of times when we're looking at films and we're doing this kind of thing, we want to, if we're not focusing on one film, to talk about all of us, but we're finding those films that, again, resonated with us and or gave us pause. That's another way to say. But
there's so many other movies that came out. I mean, 1967 was just like, that was an amazing year for film, because not only did that year produce the movies we talked about, there was also Bonnie and Clyde.
Right, which Warren Beatty and
Faye Dunaway.
Faye Dunaway, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and that was a really good movie.
Michael J. Pollard, I loved him in that movie. Cool Hand Luke was
Paul Newman again. Yeah, Paul Newman had a good run that year.
He did. Casino Royale. You Only Live Twice, one of the better Bond films. Camelot with Richard Harrison and Vanessa Redgrave playing Guinevere,
And not just that, a musical at that.
and a musical, but one of the better musicals.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the best musicals ever on film. The War Wagon, The Producers, brilliant comedy with Mel Brooks, Zero Mostel, Gene Wilder, Estelle Winwood, Renee Taylor.
And we don't want to miss Children too. In the 1967, one of the better cartoons, animated feature cartoons, came out in 1967, The Jungle Book.
I think it had racial sensitivity issues, but yes, I guess it was one of the better ones. It did. In Cold Blood came out, starring Richard Brooks and John Forsythe, who another character actor that I really liked, and Robert Blake, who played the murderer. Oh my God.
Well, people today might think, yeah, I guess I can see that.
Yeah. Yes,
but before you jump off of that movie and Robert Blake, do you know who Robert Blake was right early on in his career?
Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. He had the lead role in that TV series.
Well, you're talking about not Thomas, the other one.
I can't.
But that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about earlier, because that's actually after In Cold Blood.
Oh, which one? What did he play?
He played Mickey on the Little Rascals.
Oh my God! Shut up.
Little Mickey. Everybody was little adorable Mickey was Robert Blake.
Wow. And How to Succeed in Business.
Beretta. That's the name of the movie.
Beretta. That's right. How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. I loved Robert Morse in this film. It's my favorite movie with Robert Morse, but also Michelle Lee, Rudy Valley, another a comedy that was brilliant, I think. Dr. Dolittle came out with Rex Harrison.
Rex Harrison, yeah. That was actually really good.
It's very well done. The Taming of the Shrew with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton came out. Far from the Madding Crowd, Julie Christie, Peter Finch. That is a classic movie of 1967 with Alan Bates and a very young Terrence Stamp.
Okay.
And
I got another movie because I want to say one too.
Oh, okay, sorry. I know I have just kind of gone off on a tangent here. Yes, what would you
This
like
was
to
not
bring
considered
up?
a great movie, but for me, I love James Bond and Sean Connery as James Bond back in that era. But I always thought, well, they always had this British secret agent. I was like, when are they going to have an American secret agent? Well, James Colburn was my American secret agent in Like Flint.
That's actually a pretty good movie. I mean, it's campy, but it's actually pretty good.
And he's actually just really good in it.
He's awesome in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Barefoot in the Park with Jane Fonda and Robert Redford.
Robert Redford, yeah.
Reflections in a Golden Eye. Marlon Brando, Elizabeth Taylor, Brian Keith, Julie Harris. Excellent movie. And one that actually stands the test of time.
Lee Marvin in Point Blank.
Mm-hmm.
Another good film.
So, I mean, if you want to take a walk down memory lane and you want to pick a good year for film, you would not at all be in the wrong place by landing on 1967, because there is a wealth of just incredible films that came out that year. The Way West, Death Rides a Horse, so many incredible films that came out in 1967.
It's a myriad. It's a cavalcade,
Mm-hmm.
a myriad of just good film, good acting, good actors. I like, I've seen a lot of Westerns, going back to that momentarily here. But a Western that wasn't quite the same kind of Western that I was used to was Will Penny with Charlton Heston
Right.
and then Lee Majors. A very different approach to film and how people who need to get along to survive. That's what this film is about.
Mm-hmm. And then there was Hurry Sundown and Hour of the Gun. Not as well known, but those movies are also very interesting. And how about Divorce American Style?
Haven't seen that one.
And Elvira Madigan.
Did you mention Far From the Maddening Crowd?
I did mention that.
Yeah, good film.
Excellent film. So yeah, just an absolute wealth of movies to choose from. And while I think Nick's 1967 is distinguished just because not only were there lots of films being released that year, there were lots of good films being released that year.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't say that about a lot of years.
Yeah, a lot of times we have to almost look at the decade as opposed to one in particular year. And this was one of those wealthy, girthy years where film was just really, really well done, and the acting was stellar. And that's sad in a way, because I think a lot of people miss out on classic Hollywood and earlier films because we're so used to the now and what's coming up. We don't take advantage of some of the better films that have ever been made that came from our history, as opposed to more current things. So I'm hoping that we can be that vehicle to remind people and or introduce people to the films of the past and how important they are in cinematic history, as well as some of the better actors in their youth, especially us baby boomers, really good actors in their youth, and some of the wonderful work that they've done.
Agreed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty much our show tonight. We hope that we've mentioned a few films that we've convinced you to at least take a look at. And we hope that you agree with some of our summations of what these films actually facilitate to us as a whole. But you definitely take a look at the year 1967. You can just, with the modern technology we have today, just Google 1967 film or the best films of 1967, and you'll find a lot of the films that we mentioned, and also the films that we concentrated on and talked about today. Any last things before we get out of here, Karen?
They call me Ms. Movie Maven. They don't call me Karen.
Oh, sorry. Ms. Movie Maven.
No, not really. I said everything.
Virgil Tibbs. Well, Mr. Virgil Tibbs, you can't help us with a little crime, murder, Mr. Virgil Tibbs. My bad imitation of Rod Steiger.
I love that part where Rod Steiger's questioning him about what he does for a living, because he has no idea that he's a cop, and he's asking him how much he makes. He's like, how did you make all that money? Would you steal it?
I am the police detective.
You're what?
You're a police detective. You didn't steal this money? They pay me $26 a day, which we're sitting there thinking, really?
Yeah, that's a lot. Wow. So I mean, wow. How can I get to Philadelphia? Get me one of them jobs.
I'm like, stand in line, because obviously anybody can be a detective in Philadelphia.
Wow.
I was like, whoa. But understanding that it's the times.
Yes.
But it was just funny, because they're sitting there thinking he makes $26. Rod Steiger even said $26 a day. I don't make that in a week.
Right. What kind of job did you nab to make that kind of money?
I'm a police detective.
Police. Wow, you're really milking that really bad Sidney Poitier imitation for all it's worth.
Well, I
Whoa.
figured if I can do the bad Rod Steiger, I can do the bad Sidney Poitier.
See, this is why you have to watch the movie, because this in no way represents the movie. Okay, just so you know, ladies and gentlemen. And I disavow any knowledge of my critic on the other side of this computer. I don't know nothing about him. Ooh, ouch, that one hurt.
What I thought was funny was when Rod Steiger tells the what's the actor who plays the guy who brings Virgil in?
Warren Oates.
Warren Oates, yeah. So he has this is the silliest part in my mind. He calls Warren Oates in, says, throws the money at him, says, "What? Look at that. What is that?" "Well, I found it on him." "No, open it up and look at it." He looks at the badge, he goes, "Oh." Then he puts it down and goes back out. That was like,
it's like, and you meant to say what? You're leaving me hanging.
like, isn't there more?
Yeah.
It was almost like,
no, there isn't.
Mr. Virgil, your police chief is on the phone. Yes, chief, but they don't want my help. I mean, it's them. He's basically saying it's them. They don't want my help.
You know they're racist, right, sir?
These people don't.
You know, prejudiced. I mean, prejudiced.
These people don't want any kind of help. If you get my meaning. And obviously, on the other end, the police chief is saying, "You're staying."
Right. Exactly.
Unpack your bags. Well, you ain't got to unpack your bags, but you're staying.
We're sending more clothes down to you because you're there until you get it done.
Oh, that is a good movie, though.
It is excellent. Love that movie.
But yeah,
and the soundtrack with Ray Charles, awesome.
In the heat. Okay, I won't do Ray Charles either. I know. You can say it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Absolutely awesome.
Crushed Rod Steiger, crushed Sidney Poitier, and he tried to crush poor Ray Charles. I gotta stop.
I forgot to mention that Quincy Jones did the original music for this movie and did win an Academy Award for Best Original Music written for a movie.
That's what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The payoff.
Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great film. I was alluding to that I watched YouTube for those little segments.
Mm-hmm.
And that segment inside Rod Steiger's office is just one of the best parts in film to me, when he's grilling him about
the salary.
So where'd you get this money? You killed that man. That's where you got that money.
Yeah, no, not so much.
That's just like,
close, but no.
I'm more like Todd Steiger instead of Rod, but still.
If he'd asked me yesterday, yes, I killed him. But today, no. No, today I didn't kill him.
I love that. Virgil, your name is Virgil. Your name is Virgil.
Is that what they call you? They call me Miss.
They call you Virgil. Like, no. That eyebrow starting to go up. No. They call me that is.
We have got to end this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for my fellow critic.
What time are we in? This is Sparta.
Okay, and on that lovely note, we are out of here. But please follow us on Twitter at A Real Movie Guy, and please follow us on Facebook, wherever you find Facebook, and please just check out our archives on YouTube Live, and please join us again when we find out some more movies that we're going to watch and that we hope you watch too.
Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody have a good night. Goodbye.
Night.
They call me